Welcome to Philosophy and Politics Made Simple, where we post around once a week all about politics, philosophy, economics, religion, and whatever makes you think yay, controversial. I'm your host, Stefan, and this episode is all about how philosophy and politics are so intertwined, even today, and why we got to break it down and analyze it so we can move on to the actually epic topics. Every political debate today, whether it's about freedom, justice, or power, has already been fought in the minds of philosophers for centuries. But here's the real question. Do politicians actually follow these deep intellectual ideas, or are they just using philosophy as a tool for power? Let's break down how philosophy and politics are still deeply intertwined and why that might not be such a good thing. And a little disclaimer before we start, every single topic I speak about in this episode really deserves its own full-length video. Can't cover Plato, Locke, Kant, Trump, Reagan, Franco, this guy, Republicanism, Democratic, or any ideology or any one person you can think of in just this video. I promise that we will go into everything I can get into in future videos, hopefully doing everything a justice. Anyway, thank you for watching and let's get started. Think about it. Every major political ideology, liberalism, conservatism, socialism, communism, fascism, and even, this one was built on a foundation of philosophical ideas. Even the concept of democracy itself wasn't a political invention, but a philosophical one that has developed over a millennia of history. From Plato, Aristotle, to Locke, to Montesquieu, to Rousseau, and way, way more. Plato, for example, despised democracy. He thought it would lead to chaos because people, in his view, were too easily manipulated. This led to the idea of democracy becoming more complex. To prevent tyranny of the majority, ideas such as proportional representation in constitutions are proposed, which added layers upon layers to plain old democracy. Meanwhile, thinkers like Jean Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau introduced the idea of the social contract, the belief that governments only have power because the people allow it. Sound familiar? It's the basis for almost every modern democracy, even if there is no tyranny of the majority. And this is just one example of how philosophy can come to define politics, and vice versa too. But here's where things get interesting. Do today's politicians actually follow these philosophies, or do they just cherry pick what suits them for their own goals? This is the question where we get into philosophy and politics today. And I have just a couple examples within the real world. Take, for example, the idea of utilitarianism, the philosophy that policies should create the greatest good for the greatest number. It sounds like common sense, right? But in practice, it leads to some pretty controversial decisions. This kind of goes back to tyranny of the majority, something Thomas Jefferson was super critical of. We're going to get into him in an upcoming episode. Should government sacrifice personal freedoms for national security if it benefits the majority? Some argue that's exactly what's happening with surveillance programs and emergency laws. For example, many governments claim to follow democratic or liberal philosophies, yet they implement mass surveillance programs. China's social credit system is a real-life version of 1984, where citizens are constantly monitored and rewarded or punished based on behavior or thought. Even in the United States, Patriot Act post 9/11 raised questions about whether national security outweighs personal freedom, a direct contradiction to classical liberalism. Then there's capitalism versus socialism, a debate that is less about economics and more about philosophy. Adam Smith's invisible hand versus Karl Marx's vision of class struggle and overthrowing the bourgeoisie. Yet, most modern economies don't fully commit to either of their philosophies, because let's be real, they were more philosophers than economists. Even in capitalist nations, governments intervene to regulate markets. Even in socialist states, capitalism exists in some sort of form. It kind of has to, as we're going to explore in later episodes. I don't want to get too into economics yet. I do want to quickly touch on it. Many Western governments advocate for capitalism and the free market, yet they intervene when corporations fail. During the 2008 financial crisis, major banks were bailed out despite years of promoting laissez-faire economics. Or Germany's debt bailout of Greece. This is a direct contradiction of Adam Smith's invisible hand, a case where philosophy was ignored for political pragmatism. What's the point of me telling you about how politics and philosophy are intertwined? Why tell you about either of these things? Why dumb it down? Why simplify it? Well, simply, the way I see it, philosophy provides a blueprint Think like you're constructing a house, right? You need to have a blueprint in order to have your plans initialized before you can have anything finalized or built. And philosophy does that. It provides the blueprint for actually almost everything we do in life. But politics is often just that messy interpretation of it, that bad construction job. And so here's where things can get a little rough, especially in today's modern world. Politicians love to quote great philosophers, but they often contradict the very ideas they claim to follow. Heck, many of the greatest philosophers practiced ideas contrary to their moral philosophy. Immanuel Kant, anyone? Take freedom. Many leaders promote individual liberty until it threatens their democracies claim to be driven by the people or their elected representatives. But many major military decisions are made without public approval. For example, the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 was justified as spreading democracy. Yet, many argue it was driven by political and economic motives rather than any sort of philosophical ideals. This raises the question, is democracy really about the people's will? Or is it just a convenient justification for global influence? Even Machiavelli, often labeled as the father of political manipulation, would probably say today's politicians have mastered his playbook. The idea that it is better to be feared than loved is alive and well in modern politics. So, what does this all mean? Well, simply put, philosophy still shapes politics today, but not in the way you might think. Instead of serving as some sort of hierarchical moral compass, it's often used quite selectively, like a weapon in political battles. Don't get me wrong, I do this all the time. But on top of how intertwined these two topics are, it's how fascinating these two topics are. I could spend hours on just utilitarianism. There will be dozens of videos on just the American founding, and dozens more on every single political ideology you can think of. Or even better, dozens of videos on just Immanuel Kant. Because we got to talk about him a lot. Are today's political leaders true philosophers, shaping a better society? Or are they just pragmatists using philosophy as a convenient tool to justify their actions? Are there philosophies which are better than others? How can I even understand Kant? Why is America what it is? Why is Nazi and commie thrown around like buzzwords? Why is there such division among political parties? In which ways do philosophy drive all of us to our own actions every day? This is what this channel will explore. Between the American founding and America today, the great ideological struggles like fascism and communism, where philosophers and politicians get their ideas from, how it works today in many societies, not just the United States, how religion greatly influences millions of lives and thought processes around the globe, and many, many more questions. I hope you enjoyed today's video. It was, after all, the first video of this channel. Let me know what you think in the comments. Tell me what philosophies you want to hear about, what political events you want me to analyze or cover. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.